Why is it that every Sony game is starting to feel the same? God of War, Spider-Man, and now Ghost of Yotei. They all follow the same formula. Walk, talk, fight. Let me start out this review by saying that Ghost of Tsushima was one of my all-time favorite generic open world games. I put a lot of hours into it. Ghost of Yotei, on the other hand, I was able to beat in 16 hours, and I low-key hated it. I'll talk about why, but let's get into the main reason why you would get this game. The story. The main quest is solid, and even the side characters feel like real people. Many of them clearly affected by the Yotei 6, the main villains of the game. But the story's structure has some issues. Every major villain is introduced alongside a new supporting character, and each arc ends up feeling like a self-contained story rather than a cohesive part of a larger narrative, at least up until the later chapters. But the villains were actually my favorite part of the game. They're smartly written, with each of their own motivations and logic behind it. Meanwhile, the main character kills hundreds of enemies in the name of revenge, which feels shallow by comparison. I'm not trying to say that the main character wasn't interesting, just that every Sony game seems to be hammering home the same message of revenge bad and the cost of violence. I'm not a toddler, despite the fact that the game seemed to treat me as such as often as it could. But we'll get into the gameplay later. Weirdly enough, Yotei actually has the exact same premise as Assassin's Creed Shadows, and I actually think that Shadows handled the intro better. It gave you time to connect with the main character Naue, while Yotei kind of just drops you in. That's not to say that Shadows tells a better story overall, just that its beginning was stronger. But alright, let's get into the gameplay, which is mostly gonna be the combat. Combat's brutal, fast-paced, and basically identical to Ghost of Tsushima. Honestly, it's the exact same as Ghost of Tsushima. For a game that's been in development for this long, they really didn't try to reinvent anything. You'll get many of the same abilities from Tsushima, with the main difference being that the stances have been replaced with different weapons. But the catch is that every weapon ends up feeling pretty much the same because they're just meant to counteract an enemy weapon type. And outside of combat, this is a nothing burger. Climbing is brainless, and when you're not fighting, you're just walking or watching cutscenes. To its credit, the combat is fairly difficult early on. Enemies can take a lot of hits and can nearly two-shot you, which feeds into the exploration. This world is absolutely stunning. Visually, Yotei is the peak of the series' art direction. But ironically, it also feels more bland than ever, like they painted a beautiful canvas and then filled it with copy-paste points of interest. Visit a hot spring, get a health boost. Visit a shrine. That's the only way to increase your stats now that leveling and XP is gone. I understand the goal. They want exploration to feel meaningful by tying it directly into the combat progression. But the reality is it makes it feel like a checklist of chores just so you can get to the game being playable. This was already a huge complaint for a lot of people with Ghost of Tsushima. Me not being one of them, because in that game I felt like I was exploring because I wanted to. In this game it felt like I was exploring because I had to. Don't get me wrong. Yotei is not a bad game. In fact, games of this quality and scope are rare. But as a sequel, I expected more. Ghost of Tsushima was one of my favorite generic open world games. That's not a dig, it just never pushed any boundaries to be more than a generic open world game. And Yotei, unfortunately, doesn't do anything to change that formula and ends up feeling like just another generic title. Back when Tsushima released, it was impressive. But since then, we've had games like Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring, setting a new precedent for what open world games can be. Yotei is nowhere near those games, but even its competition, Rise of the Ronin or Assassin's Creed Shadows, pushed the genre forward in meaningful ways while still being generic open world games. Yotei, ironically, feels like it's stuck in the past. Content was polished rather than innovated on, and I'm not hating on it. It's clearly a phenomenal game in terms of its production quality. It's just that for me personally, it wasn't that fun. Ghost of Yotei is like taking your grandmother's house and renovating it. It's still the same old house. And for a lot of people, that's gonna be enough. But for me, I found the gameplay to be uninspired. The irony is that this is one of the most beautiful open world games I've ever seen, but what's actually in the world is bland as hell. As for my recommendation, I don't know, man. I personally would not. It's such a shame, but Ghost of Yotei is nowhere near my game of the year. I will reiterate and say that the story was great, but there's just so much filler content with grandma giving her life story to describe why you're doing this quest, for it to ultimately end with you killing a bunch of people. You don't need to give me the details, just let me play the game. And the main story, oh my god, it would have been flawless if not for how generic it was. Don't get me wrong, it's very well written, but the ending completely soured the whole experience for me. The main story would have benefited so much by being a lot shorter. No joke, every single time you confront one of the bosses for the first time, they escape. This happened so consistently that it wasn't a surprise the next time it happened because I was expecting it. Without getting into spoilers, I think that this would have been much stronger of a narrative if the main character was killed off at the end. But that wouldn't fit into Sony's plans because of course at the end of the day, they have to sell DLC. I think that a lot of people will completely disagree with my opinion and absolutely love this game. I can even see some people naming this their game of the year. But for me, honestly, this game was so boring. You're just walking and talking and fighting and walking and talking and fighting. And the combat has no depth. It's not even a puddle, it's just dry. Mash triangle with the right weapon until the enemy breaks their guard, then hit them with the square button a couple times. Rinse and repeat. But I think most everybody's gonna be impressed with the visual side of things, in which case this game is god tier. My problem is that it's not much of a game. Rightly so, a lot of people are going to draw direct comparisons between Yotei and Assassin's Creed Shadows, which makes sense because, let's be real, Ghost of Tsushima was an Assassin's Creed knockoff in the first place. The difference was, Ubisoft kinda sucked ass back then and kept releasing broken products, and Tsushima came out complete and fully polished. But with Ubisoft taking Assassin's Creed Shadows seriously and releasing the game fully polished, I can't help but draw direct comparisons between the two. In which case, Yotei's got story, Shadows has gameplay. Whichever of those is more important to you should be the game that you should get. Or, you know, just get Ghost of Tsushima because it's the exact same game and it's a lot cheaper. The narrative and way that the game tells the story isn't nearly as strong, but Jin Sakai is a better character. There, I said it. Jin's story is about sacrificing his honor for the sake of victory to selflessly save his people. Yotei's story is the same as every Sony game within the last decade. I must get revenge, but at what cost? I've already heard this story thousands of times before. The problem is when you end up making a generic open world game that's grounded in reality, and the main character is a borderline psychopath with the amount of corpses they pile up, the story doesn't have much room. It has to justify and explain why you're doing the killing. And the nerd term of ludonarrative dissonance has become a serious problem with anything Sony touches, with one of the few stories where it worked being The Last of Us 1, because Joel was a psychopath in-game and in the cutscenes. I swear to God, the amount of times Yotei would take the controller out of my hands to force me to watch an unskippable cutscene was egregious. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed my TED Talk and why I didn't like Yotei.